Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about validating a case on Westlaw using KeyCite. Now, because we spent so much time in those last 5 videos learning our way around and how to navigate around the citing references and negative history and so forth, I don't think I'm going to have to spend a lot of time on this. I think by now you've got a pretty good idea of how you find out what's happened to a case you're interested in. So let's get started. First, let's think about what we're doing when we validate a case. Why do we do it? Well, first of all, cases get reversed. Now, if a case was bad for your client, you might be happy to see that it was reversed. If a case was good for your client, it might upset you to find out that it had been reversed on appeal. However, there's one thing you need to keep in mind. There's often more than one issue at stake in a case. Suppose, for example, the case that you are checking had one issue about a pretrial motion, and that's the issue you're interested in, and one issue about the admissibility of some kind of evidence, and you're not at all interested in that. It has nothing to do with your case. If the case was reversed on the issue of admissibility of evidence, then you're not really concerned about that. It doesn't affect what the court said about the issue you're interested in. On the other hand, if it was reversed on the issue you're interested in but not on the other, then you do care. The point is, you can't just look to see that a case was reversed and be happy or sad. You have to read it to find out why it was reversed. Was it your issue it was reversed about? In a similar vein, a court might overrule a decision that it made before. Now, as a refresher, remember, cases go up and might be reversed, but then years later, another case may come to that same court and it overrules itself. So, for example, Plessy versus Ferguson was not reversed in Brown versus the Board of Education. It was overruled. And again, you need to read the case to find out what issue or issues was the case overruled about. If it wasn't what you're interested in, then the case may still be good law for that point of law. Now, finally, you also want to validate a case because you'll find that other courts gossip. And what I mean by that is a case may have a good or a bad reputation because other courts have either criticized it or praised it in their own opinions. A good example right now is Judge Cannon's opinion about presidential immunity in the Northern or Southern District of Florida. Another court out west, it might have been in California, I don't remember, recently refused to follow it, basically ruling that it wasn't a very good decision. Now, this is a very young case, so we don't have a lot of gossip about it, but if you're key citing an older case, you're going to find that it may have been criticized by many other courts, or they may have declined to follow it. Those are all negative results in other courts, and although they didn't reverse the decision or overruled it, it's not a very respected line of reasoning. And so a case that's been heavily criticized is probably not a good one to rely upon. In other words, when you validate a case, you're checking to see whether the case is still good law for the issue that you want to use it for, or you're looking to find weaknesses in the case so you can attack it if it's being used by the other side. So now you're asking yourself, how do I do all that? How do I find out whether a case has been reversed or overruled? And how do I find out how other courts are treating this case? Well, let's go back and look at International Shoe. Okay, so International Shoe was decided in 1945, which was even before I was born. So it's been around the block for a while. And when we look at it, we see the very first thing is a yellow flag. And we know that yellow is usually the sign for caution. We'll talk more about these flags in a minute. If you look a little further down, you'll see that next to another yellow flag, it says called into question by, and then another Case name. Well, right away, your spidey senses are tingling. There's something wrong with International Shoe. And I have to tell you, it was preparing for this video that was the first time I found out there was anything wrong with the International Shoe. This case was a case I studied and studied hard in my civil procedure class my very first year of law school in 1977, and apparently something has happened to it. Let's find out what. But first, let's talk about those flags. They're called key site status flags, and there's basically four that you really need to know about, and here they are. A red flag tells you that the case has been reversed or explicitly overruled with respect to at least one point of law. A yellow flag, like the one we had for International Shoe, tells you that the case has some negative history, but hasn't been reversed and hasn't been explicitly overruled. Now you'll notice that I'm explaining that slightly differently than the text does. A case is either reversed or it isn't. There's no question of explicit versus implicit. But overruling is sometimes not always that clear. If a court says explicitly a case is overruled or rejected, something like that makes it pretty clear. But sometimes they aren't all that clear when a case has been overruled. The only way to find out is by careful reading. Fortunately, it doesn't happen that often. The third flag looks a little bit like a radiation warning symbol. And when you see this, it's telling you that the case you're checking has cited as authority a case that has been overruled or is otherwise invalid. Now, I don't know what they mean by otherwise invalid, but this is a wonderful symbol because in the olden days it would have taken hours of work to find this out. But this is telling you that there may be a problem with relying on this case because it was relying on a case that's no longer good law. The final flag, a blue striped flag, is telling you that the case is pending before an appellate court. In other words, one of the parties appealed and it is before an appellate court. So it may be reversed in the future. You'll need to check. So now let's go back to International Shoe and see what we're going to do to find out what has happened to this case. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is look at that case that's mentioned as part of the yellow flag because evidently Westlaw think that's a pretty important case. And it's called International Shoe into Doubt. So that's what I did. The first thing I did was I went and looked at that case. And I found in it the language in which it addressed International Shoe and the rule involving personal jurisdiction. So here's some of the language in that case. The first thing you'll notice is it mentions yet another case named Daimler. Daimler was decided in 2014. And in the second paragraph, it says that Daimler radically shifted the legal landscape regarding the application of general personal jurisdiction. And then it goes on to discuss the case in more detail. Now this made me wonder, Daimler was decided in 2014. Well, the last bar exam I took was when the university I worked for in Utah wanted me to get licensed there. So in 2013, I took the bar exam in Utah and took a bar review class. And had Daimler come out before that, I would have known about this change to International Shoe. But it came out later, and that's a perfect example of how you have to use Westlaw to find out whether cases have been updated, because I've been going all this time thinking International Shoe was still the controlling law, and it was only because I did this video and I used Keysight and found out that it had all changed the year after the last time I studied civil procedure in any depth. The next thing I would do is I would look at the negative citing references. The column marked treatment is the one that tells you how these later cases talked about the case you're checking. So they may have called it into doubt. They may have declined to extend it. They may have distinguished it, which means show how this case differs from that case. And these were just the first two screens. There were a lot more. Obviously, in the negative direct history, it's only going to be negative gossip about your case. So the next thing I would do then is look at the citing references. Under citing references, you see both cases that had negative impact on your case, plus all the ones that weren't negative. So you're getting a lot more gossip here, the friendly gossip and the negative gossip. One warning on this, though, is that I would probably use my filters to limit myself at this point to any cases decided from 2014 on, because that's when the major change occurred. So I would want to see how the cases after Daimler changed the law in 2014 might apply to my case. Well, this video is already too long, so let me just show you a couple more things real fast. Here is a case called U.S. versus Hastings. It's a 7th Circuit Court of Appeals decision. And you can see here by the flag that it was reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. The next one is Plessy versus Ferguson, which I'm sure you remember. The red flag here lets you know that it was overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court by Brown versus the Board of Education. Well, I hope this was enough to get you started on validating cases. Most importantly, I hope it showed you that you absolutely must validate cases. You should learn that from the international shoe example. If I hadn't checked that case, I never would have known that the law involving general personal jurisdiction had changed.